This is the third day of the April 1970 retreat at Springwater. Yesterday we talked at the very beginning about the nature of questioning, not in a conventional way, demanding an answer, looking for the answer, but questioning being the opening up to listen and observe in the light of the question that has come up. And someone brought up after that talk, what if there's just a quiet sitting not in conflict with anything, just sitting quietly and being there, and no question arises. Does a question have to arise? You see, one must be so careful in talking and listening, not to make anything that is said or heard into something that ought to happen. Being conditioned the way we are, it's almost impossible without a great deal of careful attention to all the mechanisms of listening and categorizing and ordering. To notice that something is being put into or interpreted out of what is being said that isn't there. And the tone of voice with which something is said may also trigger the feeling, I ought to be doing that. This is something that's a must. It's good. It's the right thing. But coming back to the question whether questions need to come up when there is a state of no conflict, no self-concern, openness, withness with whatever's going on, no feeling of separation. No. What would be the question? Or could there be a question? We're not excluding that possibility, because we have a way of, as one person put it, mesmerizing ourselves into a comfortable state of openness, peace, peacefulness, quietness, a relative inner silence. And in that, the holding on to that. Our life is so tumultuous, so ridden with turmoil, non-quietness. So that finding this, or finding a way of sitting in this way, may bring about a clinging. First of all, maybe a way of bringing about that state through some subtle controls. One doesn't know, one can look. Maybe not, but it's possible. Bring about a quiet state and then hold on to it by not wanting to ask any questions. For instance, is there someone who is experiencing this state, who feels like having this experience of peacefulness and quiet? Is there even a shadow of meanness there that has produced it, is holding on to it, enjoys it? Then thought is operating. And with that, a very subtle duality separation, which we don't say is bad or shouldn't be, but not to deceive oneself that there is no self-activity. Self-activity can operate in the most concealed ways. That's why it's so hard to come upon it, because thought can conceal the fact that it is running programmatically. Thought running creates a program, and then the program is concealed because it's taken so much for granted. And that's what at least interests me tremendously, whether programs, even though they are running in a concealed way, can be exposed through attention, questioning, insight. And yet not to make a chore out of this, a new program. I must become aware of all of my concealed programs. In a light, gentle way, as we said yesterday, for a moment, wondering, looking. Not knowing. That's what questioning is. It's not knowing. And therefore not taking for granted. And in that state, something may reveal itself. A subtle control, a subtle clinging, which, if it reveals itself clearly, may not need to continue. And then what just seemed to be open really opens up. Or one may look, they may be looking, and there's nothing there, there's no control, no motive to keep this state, no defining it, no fear of its ending, no desire for its continuing. Then that's clear. Also in connection with yesterday's talk, in which we touched in some way, which I don't remember right now, upon the self. Maybe that whenever there's emotion, there's a very great likelihood that self-concern is in action, is going on. Fear for oneself or desire for oneself. Loss one has suffered. Grief, sadness for oneself, as well as for others. Anger being not getting one's way. Someone crossing one's way, not doing what one wants that person to do, or being inhibited in doing what one wants to do by someone else's doings. One can look. The question also came up, is there always self-concern in all emotions? And people who brought it up, and we paused and looked, and it seemed, yeah, that's all that seems to be going on. Some kind of hidden or not so hidden self-concern and the corresponding emotions. And again, this was heard, maybe I also said some other things which I don't remember right now. This was heard as a subtle putting down or condemnation of self-concern. question arose for this person. Isn't there some need for this self? Don't we need some kind of self-esteem first before we can let go of this self? Because without any self-esteem in our life, our daily life of job, profession, career, living with a mate, with children, living in this world, without a certain sense of self-esteem, there's chaos in our relationship, in our feelings about ourselves and our emotions. This is brought up very frequently, this thought that first there has to be the self before the self can be let go. Now, before even going into this, such a statement, there's nothing said here that the self has to be dropped or has to be let go. I don't think I talk in those ways, although I may. I'm also a creature of habit. So point it out to me if I say things like that. But what is very essential is to see it, to have insight into it, and allow the insight to operate. Insight has a direct and very intelligent action. It is intelligent action, which does not need the shenanigans and plans and resolutions of the me to operate. Those are all more perpetuation of self, resolving to drop the self. All this habitual idea of fighting evil to gain or maintain or defend the good, which is a century or millennia-old human struggle. That's how we have bifurcated the world into good and evil. Having to fight the evil so that good may reign, and with that have created immense problems and sorrow and destruction. And warfare, small and large. So it's not, no one says you have to drop the self. Who is there to drop it? There's no self. It's all thought. And then the thought, I should drop it. But that thought is not intelligently seeing. It's just going on a program of having to fight the evil to get to the good. So the thing that is brought up very often is, doesn't there have to be a self first? Or not just as a question, it's written in books, in many books. Psychology, philosophy. That there need to be a self to organize around, so that thought and action is not chaotic. There needs to be self-reference. Or if there is to be an abatement or a dropping of self, it can't happen unless there has first been a self. Well, that's clear, that's logical. Nothing can be dropped that isn't there. But it is sort of postulated, the need for the self. And I can't discuss that or argue with it because the self is there everywhere. We live that way. We're brought up this way. Our educators and parents and friends and siblings are already imbued with that sense of self. It's maybe in remembered, what the latest theory is, remembered morphogenic fields of self. This thing perpetuating itself, not just in the brain, but in a field of remembrance. So it makes no sense to talk about whether it's necessary to be there or not. It is there. Although one is free to theorize what it would be like if parents and siblings and teachers and society were without self. Then would this new baby develop a self? Nobody immediately saying, you're this, you're that, and getting praise for building some blocks on top of each other. Which we do. And then the praise becomes more important than the building of the blocks. Getting mom's attention. And with that, I am worth something in her eyes if I do this. Or the negative aspect, you're no good, you're not skillful like your brother was. So, you can speculate about it, but there is no laboratory on earth where self isn't in operation. And since there's a tremendous attachment to self in all of us that is open to view for everyone, attachment to self-image, to being somebody, or the attachment to one's negative images. The amazing thing is that there's also attachment to that because it's our existence. Exact attachment to existence as we think about ourselves. That is an operation in all of us. And whatever we are invested in and attached to, we don't want to question. Because it brings about fear, anxiety, a jitteriness, maybe a confusion in the brain, confusion in thinking. If something that has been very clearly invested in and attached to and is being questioned, then we get into a tizzy, emotionally, thought-wise, chemically. So it must be like it is when an earthquake hits. Everything is moving, clanking, maybe collapsing. Nothing safe, no accustomed safe foothold or handhold or headhold. It's the same with the questioning of the self-concept. So it's quite understandable that in our psychological endeavors or philosophical, we postulate it has to be there, because then we can breathe easier. Include the psychologist too, also a human being, philosopher. Religiously, it's postulated there is up to a point a need for a self before it can be transcended, which may need the grace of God. So to be sort of open and porous, not to all of such statements, and wonder where they come from. To look into oneself and see the attachment and maybe anxiety that comes up when there is what some people describe as the black hole for a moment. No self-image, and yet nothing that seems to take its place. So now the question, doesn't there have to be some kind of self-esteem for us to function healthily? In our relationships, family, job, wherever we're relating with each other. What does one mean by self-esteem? It needs to be explored, doesn't it, before we agree, yes, it needs to be, or no, there doesn't need to be. What do we mean by it? person asked, if I remember correctly, don't you have some self-esteem about giving talks? I was thinking about that. I was looking at it. I actually talked the day before retreat when somebody had asked me, how do you feel about another retreat coming up? And I said, I don't think about it. I talked later on with Kyle about it, who's my husband, that it's an interesting phenomenon that I don't worry about the coming of a retreat, about the talks to be given. And I do remember that talks, what the next talk would would give me some sense of discomfort if I thought about it, not knowing how will it come out, will I have something to say. Earlier on, being sure I would get stuck someplace in a black hole or empty hole, not knowing how to continue, what to say, I would write things out. Or have a book in front, have a little lectern. That seems to be sort of like a protective thing. A lectern and then a book on there, which you can always look into and say something that someone else said, which was probably so because it was an eminent master. And therefore protect yourself from anxiety that you may have nothing to say with people listening. So why is this gone today? Is that because I have built up self-esteem? And I looked at it. It's true that knowing that the thing takes care of itself somehow or other, how, I don't know, but somehow or other it takes care of itself, has dropped concern about it. So there's some memory operating, isn't there, that it works all right, it takes care of itself. But whether one builds an image for oneself out of that is an extra matter. Whether the mind starts weaving, you're good at it, and then get energy boosts, fixes, that's a good word, energy fixes from thinking, I'm good at giving talks, is absolutely unnecessary. And not only unnecessary, it's very dangerous, because in these attachments to fixes through the self-image, there's no attention. It's the tiniest of enclosures. Not open to what goes on around oneself, not even open to what goes on within oneself, because one is busily getting a fix. Now, so a positive self-image, but self-esteem plays no part in thoughts not coming up about giving a talk. What about if things hadn't worked out or weren't working out? There would be inability to speak, maybe choking up on something, or nothing coming to mind. In the middle of a talk, not knowing what one was going to say or how to go on. Well, if that was the case, and maybe in 20 or 30 years that will be the case, then I would have to do something about it. Would have to write something down again. Maybe get a lectern again. Put a book on, or something. It would serve no useful purpose to start getting all kinds of bad images about myself, but to do something intelligent about it. Or maybe let somebody else give the darn talks. Do you see what I mean? Of course, you could say this is not voluntary, that bad images are built up. It happens. The brain does that, and it's true, it does. It has been doing this for thousands of years. Due to what other people say you are, and due to what we ourselves think and talk to ourselves about ourselves. We've said it many times, but we can't say it often enough, because it's not important to say it, but to see it as it happens, and then question the whole process, and watch it. See how what was maybe some openness to birds and people and sounds now becomes a depressive involvement with a negative self-image. I'm no good, I'm a failure, I can't do it, the others have it, I don't. This pattern, I've observed it now too long, it's not going to change. Can one begin to get a feel for what happened? Not just take that for the truth, but question it. And question what happens when there is this involvement with negative self-image. And one of the psychologically helpful methods that have been devised or are in progress is to substitute negative self-image for positive self-image. I'm really not very familiar with the methods, and some people don't go to therapy, they just do this on their own by trying to achieve something. Go to medical school, one person told me. After almost 2 decades of terrible negative imagery about herself, she went to medical school, got through it, is a doctor now, and feels pretty good about herself. So now she can get positive input or energy from thinking about herself. But as we talked about it, she comes here. At times, she's a very precarious thing. Because there's always the fear, if this isn't kept up, this positive self-image, and that needs feedback from other people, people have to tell one that one is good. As she said it, I need constant strokes. If that doesn't come, then I'm in danger of falling back into my negative self-images. That is the assumption, and maybe it has happened at times. Maybe it happens all the time. But to assume that therefore one needs to keep up the positive self-esteem images is not being open to finding out something entirely different, or at least wondering whether we need any precarious images which can flip-flop at any time and need the constant support and input of our environment, people around us. Or is there a way of being that little baby again I've so often talked about in the airplane, who was putting blocks together, snap blocks, in the most amazing way, not just one on top of the other, but branching out, little curves in it. Mother was sitting beside him. She just picked up a block if it fell down, and when he was done, and of course he took everything apart, half of it fell down, so she picked it back up, but she never gushed over it, never said, aren't you terrific? You're going to be an architect. Later on, walking by that row in the airplane, I saw there were 3 more kids next to her and 2 more in front of her. She had no time. It was maybe the youngest. She was maybe done with all of this energy expending, praising. And this little kid didn't need it. It would have been poison to his system to be told how good he was, because the thing was good in itself. The fun of it, of doing it. Did he build up a self-image about himself while doing it? I don't know. But he may have learned that he can do things. Learned that things take care of themselves in giving a talk, which does not need to culminate in a precarious image. So now you could say, well, how do I get off of either the negative images or the positive images? And again, it's not a matter of getting off of them, but beginning to observe them critically. Critically means not judgmentally, but not to take all of that for granted, that it has to be this way, just because it is this way, and is this way in other people. And psychologists write about it, that we have to have that or don't have to have that. To begin questioning and examining for oneself, and looking, and in this process of curiosity, in the energy that comes with curiosity, there will be insights. It happens that way. In some way, this is the process that takes care of itself. Questioning brings with it listening. Listening brings with it understanding and insight. Insight brings change, not needing to go with something, at least at the moment of insight. Whether the old pattern with its tremendous strength, chemically, electrically, whatever makes for habit strength as physiological a basis for it, may come up again. Habit may come up again. But maybe having really seen it clearly once, it can be seen quicker this time. Maybe, maybe not. Well, one will see. Not plan for the future, because that's more program. A program that keeps us from listening and looking and touching and being here, now, with what's there. Actually, palpably, and subtly. Talking about being aware subtly of what is there subtly. One person said, just to see night come after the day, the whole feel of it, the change of light, the change of sounds, the change of fragrance, of temperature. That's enough. We come here so overloaded. Our systems, our mental systems and organ systems are so overloaded with the stimulation that pervades our society. Most of us come from the city. Few people from the country, but people who come from the city are just alone by living in the city. It's a tremendous overload of stimulation. The cars, the noise, the media, the many people. The demands of the family, the difficulty in relationship with the children or the husband or the wife. the overloaded work, difficulties there with a boss or with the people who work for one. And then the news, what is happening in the world, violence, torture, wars, occasionally the exhilaration of a wall breaking down, and then the new problems of how to live together. Not even questioning how can we live together globally, harmoniously, but my country, my ethnic group. And not only my ethnic group, but down with the other, who would be in my way or who had it better before. All of this is in the air. And not just in the air, it's in our hearts and mouths and in our whole organism. Input, overload, and input, and an overload and output, what we have to put out in terms of talking, doing, writing, reading, organizing, working. This overloaded organism arrives at a retreat, expecting peace and quiet, hoping for that, longing for that. Every pore of the body longing for this peace and quiet. And instead, for a while, is just more aware of this whole motor running. Not a smooth, quiet idle. It's not. That would be something that is maybe a joy to listen to, a smooth, quiet idle. But it's a cranky motor. There are words for it, they don't come to me right now. It's out of kilter, it needs oiling or something. So that's the first thing that presents itself in this quiet retreat. And then maybe, if there is a slowing down, a quieting down, which people report after a while, it gets somewhat more quiet, then comes a feeling of blahness. There's nothing much going. There's some thoughts going. What is there? And I'm not inventing this. I'm reporting what is reported to me as faithfully as I can. And then the feeling comes, well, something other than what is going on here right now in the body and mind should happen. Not just this blahness. Not quiet and not noisy, but one person said, I don't even know what the state is I'm in. And the immediate response was, good. That's a good way to be, not to know it, not to make a statement about it to oneself and immediately react to the state. But in this, which is also a temporary way of being after the overload, after the overstimulation, be it through sounds or activities or the things we eat, caffeine or whatever, all the foods or drugs, wine. There comes, if one doesn't have all of that, suddenly there comes naturally a state of withdrawal, where the organism still craves that in a way and doesn't get it and is sort of in a limbo. Can one be with that? Without wishing something more exciting to happen? Without wishing? Seeing that the wishing is a movement away from blahness. But what is blahness? If felt in its very essence. Which means the ideas about it, the prejudices or dislikes about it, can they be in abeyance? And if this question is asked, there's already a change. Maybe one can listen to what one has called, one will not call so any longer. And then maybe without creating new escapes, new drama or entertainment in the imagination to sort of substitute for the overload in one's daily life, just listening to the boredom we talked about yesterday, or the strange feeling. Maybe some of the subtle movements of the body and nature all around one will be perceived. The unspectacular. The unspectacular little things that have never been touched, are always overlooked, taken for granted, will suddenly come into view and into hearing and into feeling, like the change of light of an evening, the change in the bird song or in the temperature and fragrance, change of light. And the organism that is open to that is not separate from this change. When there's openness, we also turn into evening. We're not apart from that. Never were. Or in the morning, when the sky lightens and some of the clouds brighten and redden. The birds right around sunrise begin to sing more intensely, it seems. And the utter stillness of the leaves and the trees, even though they may be moving in the wind, they are moving in stillness. All of this can be perceived if there is no moving away from an unexciting, unstimulating blandness that is felt at this moment. If that is felt as the thing that's happening right now, here, in this organism. There's nothing else that's happening there right now. Or is there? One has to listen. Do you see? The words, one has to listen, aren't good. Can there be listening? There can be. If one wonders what this is all about, this body and mind and land and society and world. we will end here for today.